I'm going to read you a little bit of story. First, some background. The story came out in the fall 2005, Antique Motorcycles, AMCI magazine. Now, it's important to understand, in 1929, Eddie Ryan got the dealership for San Pedro. At the time, San Pedro was the port of Los Angeles. Long Beach was a know-nothing burg. There was no port there. There was no nothing there. There was a few little houses that were built after World War II. It was nothing. San Pedro was the main city. They had a city hall. They had their own police force. And that was where the Navy was based. The Navy that is now in San Diego. They didn't move down there sometime into the 50s. Now, Eddie Ryan had his dealership until he got in a big tiff with Boudelier, who I'm going to tell you a little story about out of this magazine. Boudelier was the head of what is now the Southern California Dealers Association. We're going to discover if that's what it was called at this time in this little book. That is what it is today. And Boudelier was so pissed at Eddie Ryan or whatever little conflict they had that he had Harley Davidson yank his dealership, which basically destroyed the man. He only survived a few years after that and died. Now, Eddie Ryan sold all his pile of stuff, which was basically Triumph stuff at the time, although Harley stuff had gone out the window, to his mechanic, which became Motorcycles Only, Bob Ross. Now, Bob Ross's son, Troy Ross, started the Long Beach Swap Meet, which we still know today as the Long Beach Swap Meet, which Topping now runs. So the Long Beach Swap Meet of today that all you guys go to can be traced through these periods of people all the way down to Eddie Ryan, to this, to that, to this, to that. George Hood, any of you guys know George, has Eddie Ryan's frame table. And this is how I know what happened, because George told me the story, which was told to him by Bob Ross, which was told to him by Eddie Ryan. It's not in this little book. It's all word of mouth passed down through the ages. Now, this is an important thing. If you go back through the videos, I have a little dealer letter that Eddie got that describes the chrome packages and the chrome available in 1934 that Harley put out. You know, little chrome like, too much chrome! Never had a chrome dash! We didn't have chrome options because it isn't in the catalog. These people are so full of shit. I just proved y'all. We have chrome packages. It's on the motorcycles. Don't destroy your original paint motorcycles. So, anyhow, chrome package was a very common thing pre-war. People had money for a bike, had money to customize their bike too, just like today. Very few people ride today a stock bike off the showroom floor and keep it that way. But pre-war, as I showed you, Harley Davidson, because it was still the Great Depression, wanted all the customization. They wanted that extra money. So all the customization was predominantly done at the factory before it ever left. And we have the 42F factory custom right there in front of us to show you. So we're going to have a little history lesson here. It's right here. Little pictures. I'm going to be reading from LA Confidential. It's Rich Boudelier kneeling with the hat inspects the Harley VLs he was finally able to sell to the LAPD. Rich Boudelier on the right introduces a new steed to a Hollywood cowboy. Can you identify the cowboy? Looks like Roy Rogers to me. Didn't you win a club hat? Dick Hutchins on patrol in Italy during World War II. Hutch, during his dual roles as Rich Boudelier, this was taken 1947. He poses with his Harley 45. Mr. Boudelier gave him a $50 discount if you paid cash for the bike. No, we're going to read this here. Rich Boudelier's Los Angeles Harley-Davidson dealership had for years sought the lucrative LAPD motorcycle contract, but with no luck. From 1921, the year Rich opened the shop, he had coveted that police contract and the money it would bring. Now, Eddie Ryan didn't open the shop till 29, so immediately he's in conflict. And the initial sale of dozens of police bikes was just the tip of the iceberg. When you factored in maintenance and replacement parts, this contract was every dealer's dream. Throughout the 30s, a Los Angeles Indian dealer had this contract locked up tight, and despite Boudelier's best efforts, what appeared to be the lowest bid, he simply couldn't get the inside track. He smelled a rat. So in the late 30s, when the Indian dealer put a shop up for sale, Rich Boudelier was standing at the front of the line. Actually, Rich's sales manager, funded by Rich, signed the paperwork. Sensing the boys in Milwaukee wouldn't be thrilled seeing one of their dealers playing both sides of the fence, Rich took this prudent move. Within a short period of time, it became obvious the Indian dealer's lock on the city contract came with a hidden additional cost. That of greasing the palms of a few city officials. Graft was really common back in the day. This game soon came to a screeching halt. The next time around, Boudelier Harley-Davidson had the winning bid. The LAPD found themselves on Milwaukee's finest. The plot thickens. Eventually, the Home Office did get wind of Boudelier's involvement in the Indian dealership, and although they were delighted with the LAPD contract, they had some issues with this arrangement. Rich was put on notice. Get rid of that fucking Indian dealership. What to do? How about the old insure it heavily and then torch it idea? Despite the risk of looking at striped sunlight for a number of years, Rich allegedly took this approach, according to Dick Hutchins, whom we will meet shortly. It wasn't long before the Indian dealership was preparing for a fire sale. Later on, the evening of the fire, with the embers still cooling, the LAPD paid Rich a little visit. It wasn't to discuss the city's transportation contract. They found him in bed, fully clothed, with a faint hint of kerosene in the air. His shoes were soaked in the flammable liquid. What prosecutors thought would be an open and shut case didn't pan out that way. Once again, according to Dick Hutchins, Rich Boudelier's bookkeeper, Mrs. White, allegedly perjured herself on the stand, claiming Rich was in bed with her at the time of the fire. Talk about employee loyalty. So in the end, Rich walked, and the conflict with the dual Harley Indian dealerships was solved. Thankfully, all the participants in this little caper have long since had their chance for their final plea bargain with the man upstairs. Enter Dick Hutchins. A California native, Dick grew up on bikes, his first one being a 1930 Harley VL. Dick was riding a 37 Harley ULH, a retired police bike, undoubtedly sold by Boudelier Harley-Davidson, at the time the U.S. entered World War II. Like thousands of young men and women, Dick enlisted early, and in doing so received his choice of assignments. He was posted to Fort Riley in central Kansas, the Horse Cavalry, and his transportation was the two-wheeled variety, a Harley WLA. On this trusty steed, he performed his duties as a messenger in North Africa and Italy for most of the war. Dick mentioned they were not limited to American iron. He had the opportunity to sample Matchless, BSA, and Triumph two-wheelers. I remember a note stuffed into a Triumph toolbox. It was penned by a young English lass at the works, and encouraged the finder, God save the king, fight hard, win the war, etc. I never did get her name, Dick joked. After his discharge in December of 45, he stopped by Boudelier Harley-Davidson, then located at Adams and Main Streets in Los Angeles. Dick must have made an impression on Mr. Boudelier because he was hired on the spot for the princely sum of $1 an hour. $1 an hour. Hutch filled 3 employee slots, mechanic, parts guy, and salesman. All this squeezed into a 6-day work week. Another duty Mr. Boudelier expected Hutch to fill was chaperone on the Sunday rides. These were provided for the enjoyment of the customers. So he didn't get a day off. Always the shrewd businessman, Boudelier at the first refused to pay for Hutch's gasoline to lead these Sunday outings. When Hutch finally put his foot down, Boudelier coughed up the 50 cents it took to fill his tank. That was a lot of money. In 1959, when Rich Boudelier was unexpectedly called upstairs for his final court date, his wife Gladys, I don't want to pronounce it, was left to run the shop. This was not her cup of tea, and before long she approached Hutch to see if he had interest in buying her out. Her asking price was $150,000 in 1959, which was probably $149 north of what Hutch could muster at the time. We'll have some more pictures. We'll continue the story. This is Ray Tanner in 1950 Catalina race. That's Catalina Island off the coast of California. Boudelier Harley-Davidson sponsored him. He also worked in the shop for a few years. And this here, the note accompanying this photo reads, "They are off. The lightweight machines for the Saturday event are on their way around the partly paved and dirt course." In the background you see the beautiful steamship SS Catalina that brought the biggest majority of the race fans to the island for a few hours before race time. Many of the smaller boats are also owned by many of the motorcycle fraternity and local club members. There are crowds like this at every turn or street corner around the course. There's one wonderful thing about seeing a race at Catalina. You can be sitting in a malt shop having a hamburger and malt and see your favorite motorcycle racer go by at 75 to 100 miles an hour. That's what I call racing at its best. Then we have Frank McCarthy and Dick Hutchins participating in the 1949 Greenhorn Enduro. This is Hutch over here. Dick took first place in the lightweight class that year. Frank captured second. This was a grueling 3-day event. Starting point was Johnson Motors in Los Angeles. Those are 125cc S model Harleys, not Hummers. And this here is the Catalina Island races. Hutch rode in a few of these events in the early years. And this here is Mr. Hutch. Dick Hutchins pictured with his first 25-year dealer award presented for him, Los Angeles Harley Davidson, the Old Rich Boudelier Company. We will continue the story. When the home office in Milwaukee heard of Gladys' intentions, none other than Walter Davidson phoned Hutch and asked him if the inventory was worth $150K. Hutch did a quick count and came up $500 short until he remembered Mr. Boudelier had 5 new air-conditioned units stored in another warehouse. It was enough to tip the tables, and Walter Davidson cut a personal check to Gladys for the asking price. Walter and Hutch had what amounted to a handshake agreement. "We'll worry about the details later. Just pay her and get her off the property," Walter Davidson told him curtly. He was one tough son of a bitch, Hutch recalled. Not wishing to let Walter Davidson down, or heaven forbid, end up on his blacklist, Hutch worked his tail off. The first few years were a struggle, but in time he had the loan paid back and was running in the black. By '79, Hutch was in a strong enough position to open a second dealership with the Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki product lines in Yucca Valley, California, 65 miles east of Los Angeles. Later in '81, the Los Angeles Harley-Davidson dealership was also moved to Yucca Valley. 5 brands under one roof, quite an accomplishment. In all, the mechanic, salesman, and business owner, Hutch has naturally seen a lot of miles in the saddle of a motorcycle. In his earlier days, he participated in West Coast competitive events such as the Greenhorn Enduro and the famous but short-lived Catalina Island races. Since he hung up his leathers, Hutch and friends have ridden to most of the lower 48 states, toured Europe and Russia, and most recently ridden the 6,000-mile round trip to Milwaukee to help Messengers Harley and Davidson celebrate their 100th. I rode a Harley 95th anniversary model on that trip, but we all had different brands along. "Whatever a guy chooses to ride, I don't care," Hutch said. One of his latest projects was the addition of the Route 62 diner in front of his Yucca Valley dealerships. Hutch rode Woodside Diner boast, first Harley diner west of the Rockies and best food west of New York City. It first opened in '94. On our visit, the joint was jumping with a lively breakfast crowd. We can't vouch for best food west of New York City, but the eggs and hash browns were tasty. Hutch said the weekends are really busy. Yucca Valley's proximity to LA gives city-bound bikers a destination for a weekend ride. On the antique front, Hutch hasn't been sitting still. One WLA and a 1940 Knucklehead were on display in the dealership. Both recent restorations were done by Hutch and Company. He mentioned a number of years ago, Max, Mr. Indian Bubeck, helped with a total restoration of his 1912 Harley. Hutch's salesmanship must have played a pivotal role getting Max to sign on to a Harley project. My understanding is that Max Bubeck has single-handedly kept the Harley-Indian wars raging since the Springfield factory closed its doors in '53. If you visit Yucca Valley and want to pay Hutch a visit, we suggest you call ahead. These days he works a short shift. I get to the shop diner around 6:30 or 7 a.m. and usually leave by 9 a.m. I spend most of the day at home in my shop wrenching on antiques, Hutch mentioned. His son, Chris, runs the shops these days. As the accompanying photos reveal, Dick Hutchins has made good on Walter Davidson's faith in him those 46 years ago. For an additional insight into the Harley-Indian wars of the Los Angeles area during the late 30s, see factory correspondence on page 34-35 of this issue. Now, I knew Hutch very briefly, not very well, because I bought his 1978 75th anniversary display bike that was in the Los Angeles Harley-Davidson dealership. And after he stopped displaying it, he took it to his home in Yucca Valley and just put it away. When I got it, it had 2 factory test miles, no dealer test miles. It was a brand new bike. And I've since sold it. Unfortunately, this is before I started the YouTube thing, so I don't have any pictures or videos of that beautiful motorcycle. It was absolutely brand new condition, untouched, from the factory. So it only had 1 mirror. Because at the time, you had to spend money to Harley-Davidson if you wanted 2 mirrors on your motorcycle. They drilled the hole, the second mirror, but they never mounted it. You had to pay them money. So Hutch told me, he says, whatever happened to LA? He says, well, when I lost the LAPD contract, I figured, screw it, I'm good enough in Yucca Valley, and he sold the dealership. Now, Los Angeles dealership back in the 80s was offered to me for $200,000, considering he had to pay $150,000 in the 50s, which I didn't know at the time. That was cheap, but $200,000 was like smoke in the moon. It might as well have been $20 million. I didn't have it. And this was at a time when all the dealerships were blowing up and going out of business. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, all this stuff was happening. And I don't know, it's probably somewhere between 83 and 85. I forget the exact year. But the man who owned it at the time says, man, I'll sell you everything. Lock, stock, and barrel, all my antique stuff. You got it all. $200,000. I says, dude, I ain't got that kind of money. I didn't remember the guy's name so long ago. I had no idea that Hutch had sold it or that he was the previous owner at this time. This was back when I was a young kid. So I did get to meet Hutch and find out some of the history. And until this story came out here, which obviously came from Hutch himself, I had no idea of the background history. But it was all tied to Los Angeles Harley Davidson history, and no mention specifically of Eddie Ryan in the story. So that's my own background story of the conflicts in the area and the little behind the scenes of what happened. So I hope you all found that very interesting. I did, which is why I bothered to make this video for everybody. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.